Heat beats through the cockpit glass like a forged door left open, and the smell is oil, sweet, heavy, cloying in the throat. Frank Malloy, 44th Bomb Group, B-24D Navigator, flattens his knee map while the Liberator scythes along at rooftop height over the Astra Romana complex. 4 Pratt and Whitney R1830s beat the morning into a steady bruise. The altimeter quivers at treetop. Barrage balloons drift like black moons on cables no one wants to see. "Mark," the pilot snaps, and Frank drags a grease pencil across the acetate, the dogleg already wrong because the city has learned them. Smoke pots erupt on the cracking units, a man-made fog rolling in black sheets. They are low enough to read stenciling on tank cars, low enough to feel heat slap the fuselage like surf. On interphones, someone counts, someone prays, someone coughs the taste of cordite. The left element clears a radio mast by inches. The waist guns chatter in short, embarrassed bursts. He had trained for a clean run. This is a knife fight with chimneys. The bomb bay doors yaw. The ship steadies on nerve, not instruments. The Norden is rumor at this altitude, the stopwatch king. Bombs away, lift, and the aircraft rises like a chest after confession. A Liberator ahead blossoms, then falls flat, a subtraction with no grammar. Towers buckle, flame rolls, the sky curdles into soot. It should feel decisive. Instead, it feels like burning a field and knowing the wind still owns the harvest. Over the sea, the engines settle into a tired song. Frank writes coordinates with a hand that will not stop shaking and thinks the thought he won't say aloud. Even if we scour this place to a scab, tomorrow's war will ask for more fuel than any city can hold. He closes his eyes and sees pipe racks like veins, pumps like hearts, an organism too vast for a single blow. Somewhere beyond his map, he senses another answer, something that moves oceans without ships, something the enemy cannot torpedo. He cannot name it yet, but he hears it in the engines, a hum that sounds like inevitability. Ploiești, August 1st, 1943, Texas to the northeast, December 31st, 1942. Frost squeaks under Joe Sparks Delgado's boots at first light, the kind of cold that turns breath to chalk. He strikes an arc, and the world narrows to puddled steel. The route pass takes, the bead stacks, and the seam on the 24-inch line glows like sunrise in miniature. Behind him, a pump house idles, valves gleaming. Ahead, pipe strung across pastures and cut banks to a horizon he'll never see. They call it the War Emergency Pipeline, big inch for crude, little big inch for products, and its choreography is faster than any manual. String, bevel, clamp, tack, root, fill, cap, radiograph, do it again. Scraper pigs thump downrange. X-ray crews leapfrog. Block valves divide the continent into segments no rupture can conquer. The line snakes north for roughly 1,250 miles. 30-odd pumping stations stepping pressure to tank farms that feed refineries and depots a U-boat cannot reach. A foreman does line fill math with a pencil stub, millions of barrels just to wet the steel, and grins like a magician counting rabbits. In the evening, a gauge needle lifts and keeps lifting. Joe lays a bare hand on the warm pipe and feels a cat's purr vibration pass through frost and clay. The newspapers will make it theater months from now with ribbon and speeches, but the first push is already moving, quiet as prayer. Inside the pump house, a Navy lieutenant shakes hands with a refinery man. They have nothing in common but oil and a war that demands oceans of it on time. Joe wipes slag from his glove and watches a tanker train down in the cut take the bend without drama. He is a welder, not a strategist, yet he understands this much. A torpedo can find a hull, but it cannot find a river under the ground. He tightens his hood strap and sparks another seam, hearing in the rod's hiss the same note the bombers carry: continuity, not spectacle. By spring, he thinks, the pipe will hum like an organ. By another spring, men he'll never meet will owe him a landing. Berlin, spring, 1943. A pencil rasp is the loudest thing in the room. Oberleutnant Hans Keller squares a column that smells faintly of paste, then lays a transparent overlay across a wall map. Romania's crude tallies sit beside synthetic outputs from Leuna, Bulin, Politz, numbers that behave only if everything runs and nothing burns. An Abwehr digest mentions American 100-octane expansion and, in a footnote, land pipelines to the eastern seaboard. He circles the phrase twice. U-boat tonnage claims look proud in headlines and small in his ledger. The Americans are moving oil as if convoys were suddenly optional. He recalculates training allocations for fighter schools, miles for panzer battalions, rations for motor columns already short of tires. Every plan breaks under the same weight: time. Synthetic plants are large, centralized, repairable in principle, and therefore targetable in practice. Rail yards are the joints of the system, and the joints are swollen. He is not allowed to write assumptions, so he writes consequences. Aviation gasoline must go to the front before it goes to pilots, and then pilots will fly less. He stares at the empty space where a miracle should be and draws a childish pipe in the margin, a private heresy. He tells himself the Reich can conquer fuel. The arithmetic tells him fuel conquers plans. What he cannot know, not yet, is how fast the calendar will turn against him. By September 1944, German aviation gasoline will fall from roughly 175,000 tons to about 5,000, a collapse of 97%, and total petroleum will plunge from roughly 316,000 to 17,000 tons. The impossible statistic sits in his future like a depth charge, already ticking. He sharpens the pencil again because that is what a loyal analyst can do. Outside, rain ticks on slate roofs. Inside, he writes Unersetzlich beside a refinery name and underlines it hard enough to fur the paper. Somewhere he cannot see, in frost-stiff fields, a pipeline is learning to sing. He closes the ledger and hears only the scratch of his own doubt, a sound that will become silence long before the tanks do. England, January 1944. Frost ghosts the briefing room windows, and the chalk squeaks like a violin string as the colonel writes one word high on the slate: oil. East Anglia, January 1944. And Frank Malloy sits shoulder to shoulder with crews who smell of wool, coffee, and cold metal. The old gospel of spectacular raids is retiring. In its place, a calendar, Leuna, Berlin, Politz, repeat as necessary. 8th Air Force by day, RAF Bomber Command by night, 15th from Italy, when the weather opens a door. The colonel traces arrows like arteries across Germany's chest, and nobody jokes because everyone understands. This isn't a blow, it's a choke. He draws escort arcs that would have been fantasies 2 years ago. P-51s and P-47s with drop tanks ride the high altitudes on 100 octane, engines happy at manifold pressures that once meant detonation. Training hours are solvent, he says, because the states keep pouring. Refineries on the Gulf grew catalytic crackers like steel forests. Octane is now strategy. not chemistry. A staff captain adds quietly that East Coast shortages have eased since late '42, some inland pipeline keeping yards wet and airfields generous. The room hums in that special silence where men convert facts into distance and fuel burn. Frank notes the geometry on his pad: bomber boxes, rendezvous times, fuel burn to target, to alternate, to home. He has flown low at Ploiești and learned that courage cannot cauterize an enemy's arteries. This new doctrine promises something colder and surer. Choke the system until training collapses and tanks roll only on maps. He thinks of the men who will ride those maps and never move, the silent arithmetic of empty Bowsers. When the briefing breaks, the maintenance chief mentions spark plug wear at high power settings and laughs that America owns more plugs than Germany owns fuel. Gallows humor, but the point stands. Frank walks the hard stand where frost glitters on aluminum like powdered glass. The Liberator smells of hydraulic fluid and possibility. He palms the cold edge of the bomb bay frame and feels the aircraft's patience. Before lights out, he copies a figure from a mimeographed sheet. American crude near 4 million barrels a day and rising, and lays the pencil down like a verdict. He closes his notebook on a thought that doesn't fit in numbers. Abundance, properly aimed, is mercy to the living and ruin to the stubborn. Pennsylvania, March 24, 1944. The platform is dressed for photographs, but the pump house is the thing with a heartbeat. Chester County, Pennsylvania, March 24, 1944. And Joe Sparks Delgado stands in the crowd while a senator saws oversized scissors through a ribbon that smells faintly of paint. The gauges inside mumble to themselves, needles steady as metronomes. A pressure pulse flows north through buried steel the way breath rolls through a chest. Big inch for crude, little big inch for products. Their names sound like nicknames, but the line is a spine with vertebrae of pump stations and nerves of copper wire. Joe remembers sleet on his hood and X-ray vans at 2 a.m. Radiographs clipped to light boxes like luminous skeletons. He remembers a pig rattling through a bend and the ground thrumming under his boots. 1,250 miles of 24-inch line stepping across rivers on catenary spans and under rail cuts in deep sleeves, pump stations spaced like vertebrae. The products line beside it is a different animal: manifolds, batch interface cuts, Avgas slugs chased by diesel, valves clicking like a telegraph. A Navy lieutenant shakes hands with a refinery foreman, and that gesture says more than speeches. Tankers and escorts are free for the far seas because the East Coast is now fed by a river a torpedo cannot find. Throughput talk is subdued, 500,000 barrels per day on good weeks once the kinks smooth out, but no one says it loud. You do not boast about the artery that keeps the heart from racing. The senator thanks welders and voters in equal measure. Joe grins because the first oil actually moved months ago. After the bunting is boxed, Joe walks the mesh fence and presses his palm to the soil. He feels it again, that cat's purr hum coming up from the loam, a private hymn. A dispatcher holds a clipboard like a conductor's score, timing product slugs so that a Jersey tank farm takes 100 octane just as a Navy yard tops off and an airfield calls wet. He thinks of boys flying on the power that octane buys, climb rate, escort range, a margin that becomes survival, and he blesses every flawless bead he burned in sleet. He lights a cigarette, then stamps it out. No man who knows the smell of gasoline lights one near a manifold. Wind tugs the last scrap of ribbon off the fence. The pump house door closes, and the hum continues, unbothered by speeches, faithful as tide. Line fill alone runs to millions of barrels, a reserve hidden in motion. What ships once risked monthly, the pipe now delivers daily, on schedule and unseen. May-October, 1944. Rain drums the hut roof in East Anglia on May 12, 1944, and the briefing officer's baton taps a rhythm that sounds like fate. The oil plan is not theater. It is a calendar with teeth. Luna when repair crews finish scaffolds, Berlin as soon as hydrogen flows, Pulitz whenever clouds lift. 15th Air Force from Italy on the same chords, and RAF Bomber Command setting fire to the night in between. Frank Malloy prints the sequence on his pad. Go, hit, photograph, go again. The metronome is the weapon. Men and machines keep time. Across the continent, Oberleutnant Hans Keller builds a different rhythm out of paper. Outputs, repairs, allocations, refusals. He watches the curve buckle. From April to September, total petroleum falls from roughly 316,000 tons to around 17,000. Aviation gasoline from about 175,000 to 5,000. 97% is not a statistic to argue with. It is a sentence. Fighter schools tow airframes to runways to save fuel, and panzer brigades exist as briefs, not columns. Frank debriefs under photographs that look like cauterized wounds, pipe racks peeled, tank farms vacant, hydrogenation units twisted into iron embroidery. The tonnage totals stack, hundreds of oil target attacks, well over 200,000 tons dropped since spring, and the rule is cruel in its simplicity. Whenever a plant nears usefulness, the bombers come back. He studies fuel figures the way he once studied flight lines, high-octane production in the States climbing toward a number that would have sounded like myth in 1940 and now reads like logistics. At a canteen table, someone says it plain, voice low to hush the luck. America pumps more oil in a single day than the Axis can hope to refine. The impossible statistic sits between steam cups like a third presence. On the wall, a postcard shows a smiling truck driver under the caption, Red Ball Express. Frank has not met him yet, though fate will introduce them in the Ardennes. He knows only that someone will feed his engines, even when the weather steals the sky. Hans files his report and tucks away a copy no one asked for. The office smells of dust and old paste. The corridor smells of damp wool. He writes a single word in the margin, catastrophal, and underlines it twice. Back in England, the rain stops. Engines cough awake on the line, coughing once, then again, then settling into that patient thunder that means the calendar will be kept. Somewhere under American soil, a pipeline keeps time. France, August-September 1944. Rain needles the canvas and the convoy breathes in unison, engines idling like cattle penned for a night move. Somewhere west of Chartres in August 1944, Sergeant. Eddie, Mississippi Carter noses his GMC CCKW into line, blackout lights winking dull as fireflies. The truck smells of canvas, damp rope, and gasoline. 50-odd gallons in its own tank, hundreds more in the bed as 5-gallon cans rattle themselves into a kind of music. MPs at the junction swing paddles with conductor's precision. Eddie glances at the hood number and pats the dash like a horse. Easy, girl. The column inches forward. Second gear, transfer case humming, chains promising traction if the fields turn to soup. They have been told Paris is hungry and Patton's armor hungrier. The trick is tempo. No gaps, no unauthorized halts, no lights brighter than a cigarette coal. He rides second gear through rain that turns ruts into trenches. The CCKW's transfer case hums. Somewhere up the road, a wrecker's boom creaks like an old door. At every depot, pyramids of jerry cans climb into the fog, dented, painted, replaced without ceremony. Drivers speak a shorthand of axle ratios and blown recaps, of coffee gone metallic in canteen cups, of brake fade on long grades that would have made any stateside dispatcher blanch. At a choke point near Étampes, Eddie watches a dozer shove a dune of empties into rough alignment. He hears that millions of cans go missing monthly, lost, pilfered, repurposed as stoves, and that the system absorbs the loss like a rich man ignoring bad tips. He doesn't believe millions until he sees a yard whose horizon is steel. Somewhere back in the States, a pipeline is humming. He has never seen it, but the steady way depots refill makes him think it must be true. The men swap rumors that a torpedo can't sink a pipe and grin like boys who have learned a grown-up secret. He passes a signboard, Red Ball Express, half shot to splinters. A French boy salutes from a doorway, and Eddie salutes back without taking his hand off the wheel. The convoy crests a rise, and the road runs east like a promise. He can just make out the shape of a Sherman on a lowboy, tarped against the weather, waiting for a drink only his cans can pour. He shifts into third, listening to the engine settle into work it was born to do, and the column disappears into rain, a factory line with headlights. Berlin, September 1944. Berlin wears a new kind of silence in September 1944, the hush of offices that can no longer explain themselves. Oberleutnant Hans Keller slides transparent overlays onto a wall map and feels the room shrink with each sheet. Leune down again, Berlin stuttering. Pölitz, a question mark. The telephone feeds him reports in clipped syllables. Repairs underway, hydrogen intermittent, rail yards blocked, and he transcribes them into something like a confession. Pilot schools tow airframes to the runway to save gasoline. Students will not fly enough to make the moves their own. The logistics desk across the hall stamps allocations that arrive as zeros. He totals columns that were never meant to meet. Total petroleum products falling from the spring's 316,000 tons to about 17,000 by September. Aviation gasoline collapsing from roughly 175,000 to 5,000. 97% is not a policy. It is a sentence. A colonel still speaks of winter counterstrokes. Hans writes the word winter and underlines it, then adds the parenthesis, without fuel. The pencil breaks at the hyphen. He has been told Romania will suffice if protected and synthetic plants will provide the balance if repaired. He believes neither now. 16 large hydrogenation plants make a target set small enough for an enemy with calendars instead of impulses. Reports from the West confirm it. Whenever scaffolding nears completion, the bombers return, punctual as tide. Mechanics send notes begging for test fuel. Motor pools shed trucks for lack of allocation while staff cars remain watered. A bureaucracy preserving its own circulation as the limbs go cold. A courier delivers a transcript from a minister who calls the situation grave but bearable. Hans copies the phrase and sets beside it a number that rhetoric cannot lift, 5,000. He imagines a pilot reading a schedule promising hours the tanks cannot provide. He imagines a panzer regiment that exists perfectly on paper and nowhere else. He rubs his temple and tastes cardboard dust, a flavor offices acquire when they stop being useful. Outside, a staff car whispers past on rationed gasoline. The sound seems obscene. Hans files his report, keeps a carbon under the blotter for himself, and stands at the window where blackout curtains have trained his eyes to be modest. Somewhere beyond the roofs, an empty rail siding holds tank cars with nothing to carry. He writes one last line: "The enemy's production is not merely higher, it is invulnerable in kind," and feels the building exhale, relieved that truth has been spoken. The Ardennes, December 1944. The forest bites and the air bites back cold. Ardennes, December 16th, 1944. And snow is falling with the patience of a man counting ammunition. Sergeant Eddie Carter's CKW idles in a lay-by as rumors skitter up the column. Enemy armor in the pines, roadblocks ahead, fuel dumps ordered dispersed. MPs move like ghosts at the crossroads, mouths wrapped in scarves, eyes like matches. A captain walks the line telling drivers to keep engines warm. A warm engine is time saved and sometimes a life. The first artillery comes as suggestion, not command. Eddie rolls when the flag drops, third truck in a string of 30, and the convoy flows into a road that has forgotten straight. Somewhere in the trees, a depot crew pulls hoses and weighs the old choice: burn it or gift it. The order, when it comes, is flint hard, thermite if compromised, no souvenirs for the enemy. The Wehrmacht has built its gamble on captured American gasoline. That plan dies if the gasoline turns to smoke. Patton's pivot will come fast. Fast is a synonym for fuel. Dispatchers sketch new routes, ad hoc spurs to keep Bowsers wet. Tankers flag through like ambulances. Eddie passes a sign repainted by saboteurs to mislead. MPs have already turned it back again. The cold squeezes lungs. Inside the cab, the breath of two men clouds the windshield. Chains thrum on frozen macadam. The transfer case sings a patient note. He has heard two facts he cannot fit here. One, the inland pipelines back home have been moving over 500,000 barrels each day, a river a torpedo cannot bite. Two, the United States Army alone has been drinking fuel on a scale that sounds fictional, hundreds of thousands of barrels daily, with the Navy swallowing as much or more. He does not know exact figures. He feels the truth in the way depots never stay empty, and there is a rumor, repeated with the embarrassment of plenty, that in October stateside units lost or repurposed more than 3 million jerry cans, and the advance still did not slow. Waste, he thinks, when multiplied by abundance, becomes merely another margin of safety. Night falls like a lid. The convoy ghosts past a knocked-out panther, turret full of snow, a mouth that forgot how to roar. Eddie cracks the window. The cold is clean, smelling of pine and powder. Somewhere behind, a black column rises where a depot made the right kind of fire. He rolls on, measuring victory in gallons. Central Europe and Pennsylvania, March-April, 1945. Cloud breaks like torn gauze over a refinery that used to look like a city and now looks like a scar. Frank Malloy leans into the Liberator's blister as the formation holds an almost polite altitude. Below, pipe racks that once stitched the earth have become blank pads and twisted iron. Settling ponds lie the color of old bruises. The flak that reaches up is late and thin, a reflex without muscle. On the ground, repair crews move like ants across a landscape that refuses to become a factory again. In debrief, he will trace arcs on a map and witness how the graph has forgotten how to rise. The next morning, the briefing officer reads a sentence that sounds like an epitaph. Fuel allocations to armored formations are negligible. Frank copies it into his notebook beside figures that once belonged to economists. Over 200,000 tons dropped on oil targets since last May. attacks counted in the hundreds, a doctrine fulfilled not by thunderclaps, but by calendars. He thinks of Ploiești, of heat and sky-black smoke, and feels the mercy of distance, precision through persistence, a cruel kindness that saves crews tomorrow by crushing today. Across an ocean, a pump house door sighs shut in Pennsylvania. Joe Sparks Delgado runs a palm across a bearing housing and listens with a mechanic's ear. The gauges hum, suction, discharge, lube oil, amperage, steady as prayer. Dispatchers speak in product slugs, Avgas chased by diesel, timed so a Jersey tank farm takes its cut just as a Navy yard tops off and an airfield calls wet. Line fill alone sits in the millions of barrels, and on good weeks the paired arteries push north beyond 500,000 barrels each day, a flow no torpedo can frighten. Joe signs a maintenance sheet and writes a small note to himself. Bearings clean, vibration sweet. Frank lands and steps onto hardstand damp with thaw. The air smells of aluminum, glycol, and wet grass. In the crew hut, he writes a letter he does not send, then sleeps without dreams for the first time in weeks. When he wakes, the map still waits, but the pins are fewer, and the sky feels wider than the war. He understands at last that the refinery below is not a place anymore. It is a finished equation. Berlin and Everywhere, April 1945. The typewriter ribbon is pale, and the letters arrive like footprints on snow. Oberleutnant Hans Keller feeds his last clean sheet and titles it without drama, Remarks on the Fuel Situation. Outside, sirens are tired of hearing themselves. Inside, the room smells of paste and old pencil shavings. He begins with the curves that bent the war. American crude, he writes, rose from roughly 3.7 million barrels per day in 1940 to about 4.7 million by 1945. Refineries added cracking and alkylation until 100 octane ceased to be chemistry and became strategy. He turns the page and accounts for consequences. Oil target attacks since last May exceed 200,000 tons of bombs. Outputs inside the Reich fell by more than 90% by September. Aviation gasoline collapsed from something like 175,000 tons in April to around 5,000 by early autumn. Pilot schools cut hours to theater. Armored formations received allocations that amounted to apology. He writes that the Luftwaffe's decline was not caused only by combat, but by subtraction. One missing train, one empty tank, one grounded hour at a time. He pauses and adds the logistics that made abundance mobile. The Red Ball Express moved fuel as if roads were conveyor belts. The 2.5-ton GMC trucks became rolling capillaries for an army that insisted on speed. Containers mattered too. 5-gallon cans multiplied and vanished by the million, dented and repurposed, and yet the flow never broke. Waste, properly hedged, became simply redundancy. A staff car murmurs past the window on rationed gasoline, and the sound feels indecent. Hans aligns the pages and composes the paragraph he knows no one wants. The enemy's production, he types, is not merely higher, it is invulnerable in kind. A continent's worth of wells, refineries, rail lines, and pipes can be bombed, yes, but it cannot be interdicted as a whole. He considers adding the word democracy and leaves it for the historians. He pulls the sheet and rests his pencil on the margin. The pencil leaves a tiny crescent, a human flaw the report does not deserve. He files the original and keeps a carbon under the blotter, an indulgence he can justify only by calling it accuracy. The building exhales. The report is thin, but it weighs enough to sink a doctrine. Home front and memory. May 1945, an aftergulls swing over a New Jersey siding where tank cars wait in a patient line. The river smells like salt and rust instead of fear. Joe sparks. Delgado signs a maintenance log and pockets the pencil behind his ear. The pump house door closes with a contented click. The hum carries on, steady as breath. A dispatcher times one last slug of 100 octane toward an airfield that will soon fly only homecomings. Those pipes that once felt secret now read like history, having on good weeks pushed more than 500,000 barrels each day. Frank Malloy walks a quiet hard stand and lays his hand on aluminum that will become pots and prefabs. He remembers the low heat at Ploiești and the cold patience of the oil plan, and decides the second saved more lives than the first could count. The war taught him that an enemy can be bombed into silence, but only scarcity turns that silence into surrender. Eddie Carter rides a troop train past a depot where jerry cans stacked like a modernist sculpture, sun-dented and paint-scarred. He thinks of nights when each can felt like a prayer, and of rumors he once laughed at because they sounded indecent in a world of ration books. He knows better now. Abundance, properly aimed, is mercy. Somewhere in Berlin, in a drawer that will not be catalogued soon, Hans Keller leaves a carbon of his report and a single line in pencil. We were not outfought first. We were outsupplied. He has learned a lesson his doctrine never taught, that a nation can win a continent by learning to move oceans through a pipe. The impossible statistic belongs here, at the quiet end. In September 1944, the entire Reich managed roughly 17,000 tons of petroleum products for the month. About 125,000 barrels when one turns tons into days. In that same era, a single day of American pipelines moved more than 4 times that figure, while the refineries behind them added millions. What ships once risked monthly, steel under soil delivered daily, on schedule, unseen. Years later, Joe hikes a right-of-way and pauses where the grass grows a shade brighter. He swears he feels a faint purr underfoot, or maybe memory flattering the earth. He tips his cap to the buried river and keeps walking. The country that ran on thunder is quiet now, but the lesson hums on. Free people, well supplied, can make silence mean peace.